thank you, folks. Our next speaker is Gregory McMillan, and Gregory is the Manager of Procurement Policy and Training at Metrolinx. So when you begin, Gregory, maybe you could spend a quick moment to distinguish between Mobilinx and Metrolinx. Gregory's team oversees procurement, policy and procedure, sustainable procurement initiatives, and training for all the Metrolinx staff and business units and the vendor community. Prior to joining Metrolinx, Gregory has spent the last 15 years working in the public procurement for the Ontario ministries and agencies, including the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services, the Ministry of Transportation, and Public Health Ontario. So Gregory, welcome. I'll turn the stage over to you.
Hello, am I able to be heard?
Yes, you can.
Oh, wonderful, excellent. But I don't have any video, so that's I got all dressed up for nothing. That's okay. That's great. So a quick distinguishing between Mobilinx and Metrolinx. Oh, wonderful. Now things are clicking in. Excellent. Okay, so Metrolinx is an agency of the Ministry of Transportation. So we are specifically governed by an MOU between the Ministry of Transportation as well as and Metrolinx. Whereas Mobilinx is a vendor that was successful in a procurement competition that Metrolinx had conducted. I believe it was joint competition be with Infrastructure Ontario and Metrolinx. Metrolinx often partners with the Infrastructure Ontario in order to conduct projects because there's a lot of infrastructure development with what Metrolinx is doing. So it just makes sense that these two parties collaborate and do business together when engaging the marketplace. On that, Mobilinx is a vendor of Metrolinx. So there's not, Mobilinx wouldn't be governed by the same procurement principles and requirements as Metrolinx would be. And that's what I'll go into today. So my presentation today is about how to do business with Metrolinx, which is largely applicable to essentially any Ontario ministry or agency, a little bit less applicable to the broader public sector, which would be school boards, municipalities, academic institutions, and so forth. So we can begin with the next slide, please. So as a brief introduction, what I'm hoping to cover today is just a brief overview of what Metrolinx is and its relationship to public procurement, as well as how to access Metrolinx public procurement opportunities. Also where Metrolinx posts its opportunities, how to bid in a very general sense. I'm not going to go into the weeds on that. And also what vendor of records are and Metrolinx's relationship to the vendor of record arrangements that are available in Ontario, as well as Metrolinx's annual procurement plan, and then other resources that may be helpful for vendors learning for more information to do business with Metrolinx. Excellent. So as I just briefly mentioned, Metrolinx and public procurement, Metrolinx is a public agency under the Ministry of Transportation. It very well could be part of the Ministry of Transportation, but at one point, one of the governments in power created different agencies to perform services that are more directly aligned to touching the taxpayer. So this also would include Public Health Ontario is included at the same time. So with that, Metrolinx was created as an agency of the MTO, Ministry of Transportation. And when they did that, they signed an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, which dictates how Metrolinx is able to operate. This includes the procurement practices and policies that Metrolinx must follow. So based on that, Metrolinx uses and must use a competitive procurement process. And this is to obtain value for money for any goods and services that it requires. The MOU that Metrolinx has with the Ministry of Transportation requires that it follows sections of the Ontario Public Service Procurement Directive, and these are under the principles of open, fair, and transparent. So Metrolinx is bound to be conducting procurement in an open, fair, and transparent method that is aligned with the procedures of the Ontario government's directives. Next slide, please. So briefly, how to access Metrolinx procurement opportunities. So speaking about opportunities for goods that are greater than 25,000 and opportunities for services that are greater than 100,000. So above these thresholds, procurement opportunities are posted publicly on MERCs, Merx is our current e-tendering service provider. They're a vendor to us, so this could change at any point. But if it does change, Metrolinx definitely would be communicating to any vendors that are doing business with them, as well as any communications for vendors on our website as well. The second opportunity to become involved with Metrolinx procurement of these values is to take part in a vendor of record arrangement. A vendor of record arrangement is available from either the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services, as well as the Ontario Education Collaborative Marketplace. I'll go into what vendor of record arrangements are and what these two groups are in just a moment. But first, on the next slide, I'll discuss briefly the Merx opportunities. So all of the tender information and documents are available on Merx. This, as I mentioned, is our e-tendering service provider. It's not owned by Metrolinx, of course, but this is our current provider. So all Ontario, it's part of trade agreements that all Ontario government agencies and ministries must have a single source for posting electronic procurement documents. So Merx is currently Metrolinx's single source for doing this. This Merx also provides an ongoing list of any opportunities that Metrolinx has. This, of course, is updated regularly to reflect new projects becoming available. So it's advised that vendors continuously check the Merx website to see if there are opportunities available for them. The documents must be submitted and obtained through Merx. Sometimes you can get the documents elsewhere, but the bid has to be submitted through Merx. And if it's not Merx, it would be a different tendering platform, but you can't quite simply send the bid to a Metrolinx employee. It states quite clearly in the process and in the documents where the bid has to go. And based on that, on the principles of open, fair, and transparent, the government must be fair in informing the vendors or participants of a procurement process, specifically how the procurement process will operate, what will trigger certain aspects of the process, how the bids will be evaluated, how the winner will be selected. So the instructions of the procurement document are paramount. The government is not able to accept bids in most cases that didn't follow the instructions of the procurement document, that typically labels them a non-compliant bid and disqualifies them from the process. So one of the strictest rules on that, of course, is the bid closing time. And in my time experience as procurement, many bidders often submit within the final 3 hours of the bidding closing time, which is a big mistake. It should be the day before. You can always resubmit on top of your submission if you think you've made a mistake, but I've seen many stories where bidders just miss the deadline, and there's absolutely nothing the government can do in most cases to salvage that bid, because they're risking legal action from all the other bidders that did meet that bid time. Fortunately, at the end of the procurement, in the spirit of being transparent, all of the results are posted. They have to be posted publicly. Some of them are posted on Metrolinx, but they are mandated to be posted on Merx or the e-tendering service provider. So this will list the vendors that were successful in the process, as well as the contract value. This is a trade agreement commitment, so all other government entities would be doing this as well that are subject to trade agreements. So perhaps not municipalities, but other definitely ministries and agencies would. Next slide, please. So going back to vendor of record arrangements, a vendor of record arrangement is simply a list of vendors that have qualified through a procurement process. So it's an arrangement of vendors, and they're vendors of record because they have been awarded a contract. So a vendor of record has a signed agreement with either the Ministry of Government Services or the Ontario Education Collaborative Marketplace. Metrolinx, of course, can set up its own vendor of record arrangements. It would do so by issuing a procurement and then potentially awarding to perhaps up to 5 vendors. We would typically do this for consulting services where we know we're going to have multiple small value, maybe 100,000, 200,000 opportunities come up in a year. And we don't want to go out to a competitive process each time. So what they would do is they would establish a vendor of record arrangement for a brief period and then pull from that vendor of record arrangement to keep things efficiently and moving seamlessly for the business units. However, those are internal to Metrolinx. Metrolinx has the ability to leverage vendor of record arrangements established externally to it, and specifically Ministry of Government Services and the OECM, Ontario Education Collaborative Marketplace. The Ontario Ministry of Government Services, this one is very important because they run an enterprise-wide vendor of record arrangement program. I actually used to work there for quite a while. So what this group does is, of course, the government has figured out that the 26 ministries, many of them have overlapping business requirements for office products, courier services, office furniture, vehicle acquisitions, the list goes on, well, to 70. Basically, when a good or service is required by at least 4 ministries, the Ministry of Government Services steps up and conducts its own procurement. It establishes a large list of vendors. It's specific to each procurement. For example, for office products, they may go with one vendor in order to get a bigger discount. But for something like vehicle acquisitions, they need more variety. So they'll open it up to maybe 6 or 7 different vendors. But the main thing is that when Metrolinx is considering to fill a business need, for example, office products, the first stop would be to check the Ontario Ministry of Government Services. So this will provide us with direct access. We don't do a competition. We simply sign a contract with the vendor of record, and away we go. We are able to start procuring goods and services. It's the same process with the Ontario Education Collaborative Marketplace. They have over 70 goods and services available from 300 vendors, whereas Ministry of Government Services is larger. The OECM also is focused more on school boards. This group is a not-for-profit organization that is established to act as a centralized purchasing organization for all of the schools and school boards in Ontario. So the same thing, it's a massive elimination of duplication of effort from a procurement administrative standpoint. As well, from an economics point of view, you get economies of scale by leveraging the bulk buying capability of all of the schools in Ontario, rather than having each school go out, or each school board, to procure its goods and services. So we look to these vendor of record arrangements, not only because they very often offer the best value for money, but also it's the easiest from an administrative point of view for us to conduct the procurement in this process. Because of course, conducting a procurement costs a lot of time, a lot of vendor burden. So we try to use these methods as much as we can. As a side note, with the vendor of record arrangements for the enterprise ones, for the Ministry of Government Services, these are typically mandatory for the government, the ministries to use. They're not mandatory for Metrolinx, but they are mandatory for all of the ministries and some agencies of Ontario to use. So if you're looking to sell goods to the Ontario government, the ministries, the vendor of record arrangement is definitely something that you want to take a look at. And once again, these are established through open competitive procurements, all of them, all 70 of the vendor of record arrangements. And I believe the Ministry of Government Services, the ministries currently post their procurements on a system called Jagger. But a quick look at their doing business site, and you'll be able to see more information about that. So yes, next slide, please. So as also to provide advance notice to the vendor community, Metrolinx publishes and develops an annual procurement plan. So this includes estimates of what Metrolinx expects to be purchasing over the next fiscal year. This is only for high value procurements that will be publicly posted. And the APP is effectively designed to ensure that Metrolinx is planning ahead, is aligned with its business plan, as well as to provide transparency and overlook to vendors. So they're able to understand what procurement opportunities are coming and when they can be looking for them, as well as plan their workload as best as they can. We publish the APP on our external website, metrolinx.com. But once again, it is only an estimate. It's not a guarantee. There are many things that can happen that could delay a typical procurement, but usually if the procurement's posted on this plan, it's coming sometime. It might be delayed, but it's usually, this means it's in a budget, it's received financial approval, so it's definitely can be expected. And last slide, please. And so we do host a wealth of other information that are designed to help vendors do business with us. We do include on our website many more resources for vendors to explore, things such as our vendor relationships program, our performance management system, purchase order T's and C's, as well as our COI, conflict of interest policy, essentially anything related to COVID. If we have a vendor code of conduct coming, those requirements as well. So we do try to give our vendors as much notice and as much information as possible about doing business with us. But yes, in a nutshell, that is an overview of doing business with Metrolinx. we very much follow the same flavor as the other ministries and agencies.
Excellent. Thanks, Greg. That was very helpful, very informative. Again, are there any questions for Gregory? Again, you can type them into the Q&A section, you can type them into the chat, or you can raise your hand if you have any questions for Gregory. And you do look very sharp, Greg. You did eventually come here on screen, so thank you for dressing up. We appreciate that.
I was just joking, but thanks.
That's okay. Any questions for Gregory? Going once? Going twice? Going 3 times. Well, look at that. I guess everything that you needed to share got shared, Gregory. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here.